best shot was to run away. You know, your parents could hire you out as an apprentice, and you could be horribly beaten and sexually misused, and you had no recourse. These are recent developments for women and children, and as women become freer, so the children usually goes in tandem. Spousal rape is now actually illegal in all 50 states. However, there are still few remnants. There are lighter penalties for spousal rape and for stranger rape. And in 20 states in the United States, it's still legal to rape your wife if she's mentally incapacitated or physically incapacitated. You can have what they call non-consensual sex with your mentally ill wife or your physically incapacitated wife. So it's also harder now for divorced fathers to abandon their wives and children financially. However, you know, women very rarely, 35% of poor women and 50% of wealthier women ever get their full child support. And at this point, they're getting even less. So the feudal family is dying, but its privileges linger on. Now, part of the richness of the legacy of women is because we are left with the children and because we ask for the children. Starting in 1936, when children could no longer go out to work, women got custody. Sort of cute enough. But when a marriage breaks up, women are not usually alone. Women are with children. Plus, we have a tradition of being the social directors and we connect, which is very good for our mental health. When men are isolated and alone, they usually don't reach out to other men. And they're much more prone to violence, as I will talk about last week, because in the last month, 48 people have been shot by upset men, 7 upset men, 4 of whom were abandoned by women and also were unemployed. So loneliness is a huge predictor of mental illness. If you're lonely, you have a much greater chance of becoming isolated and kind of paranoid and enraged. And the mental illness prediction is about on parallel with the physical illness prediction. Loneliness is right on par with heart disease and diabetes in terms of predicting illness, serious illness. And that's just because if you are lonely and upset, your body secretes cortisol, which puts a stress on all your organs. Makes you feel like you're in an emergency situation, you're alone. Because part of the problems that have made mental illness such a problem in the United States is that human beings are social animals. We survived as a species because we bonded in small groups. And the whole brain changes when you look at people in your little group, and it changes in a more hostile way, you know, when you look at people outside your little group. But if you're not in a group, if you don't connect, you're really in danger. It's not good for the species. When you're born, your brain is about the size of a small fist. By the time you die, it's about the size of a football. And that's because it's social connections that build the brain. We're such a social animal that our brain doesn't even really develop except through social contact. And so the more isolated people are and the more alone they are, the more in trouble they are. Now that there are excellent cameras for brain imaging, there's very good work on this. There's a very good book by Cacioppo and Patrick from 2008 called Loneliness. Very good. But at any rate, so in traditional and class terms, the feudal family is withering. It's just, as I said, the necrophile fantasy of the religious right. The fastest form of family is a household. This is a revolutionary change in what a household is the individual household, which I call an individual household because the individual is in charge of his or her own production of domestic goods and services and emotional services. So it means that if you want to connect with someone, you have to do the connecting. There isn't a wife there, social arrangements or family, something like that. And you also do your own cooking and cleaning and are responsible for yourself, as well as your own income. Now, that is a hugely developing household as Americans get more and more isolated. For example, in Manhattan, 48% of households are single-person households. And for people who live, and actually it goes way up over 60 if you count people in roommate situation. 20% of Americans now don't marry. So, and children will spend at least 75% of children will spend at least part of their childhood with people who weren't their biological parents. That's why this old idea of mommy, daddy, and baby forever is quite passé. That's in the individual family is slowly becoming the dominant form of U.S. household. And it's very encouraged by American individualist ideology that somehow you're superior if you can make it on your own, even though nobody can, and it's totally bad for the species. That's the ideology. The lone person who takes it all on, whether Michael Clayton destroys capitalism by himself, or whether the Lone Ranger did it, or whatever. That there is this ideology that's very dangerous that leads to that. And there's also been a pressure on women to be alone from a feminist movement, which hasn't necessarily, with all of its strengths, celebrated that one of the great things about us is that instead of flight and fight, when you study women's groups, it's fear and connect. That we're the connecting sex, which is a terrific thing. And we've been responsible for maintaining life, which I think is pretty great. I remember when they had demonstrations for getting women in the military, I was thinking, oh, get no one in the military, forget it. That's where I was really proud that we create life rather than destroy it. So there is in America this false idea that detachment from other people gives you a sense of superiority, and that's part of this aloneness of the individual household. In addition, there are two other class forms that are developing. One is a communal household, which is built on kind of Marxian precept, from each according to his ability or her ability to each according to his or her needs. That's based on collectivity, shared earnings, shared childcare, shared housework, and that kind of family form is encouraged by family therapists often, and by some feminists, and by some progressive people, and it's a slowly growing form. And there's another, much proselytized by the right wing, which is what I call the fascist feudal family, because it's built on the family model, and not self-consciously, I don't think, but it actually fits the family model of the family under the Third Reich, where women worked up to 60 hours a week, but got inferior salaries because their true mission was taking care of men and women. Now, about 40% of the population calls themselves fundamentalists, but those families that ran according to the fascist feudal family ideology don't work as well. The red states have the most divorce, the most use of pornography, the most violence in family, and so on. So, there is an interesting parallel, because in the Third Reich, the man was the leader just under the Führer, who was the leader of the man, and the man was the leader of the woman. And in the Southern Baptist Convention on Men and Women, the male is the leader, and the wife is to be subordinate to the man, and he is the leader under God. So it's women in the Catholic faith are supposed to be in charge of hearth and home, which means you do the housework no matter how you work outside the home. And that fits in with that Third Reich idea that you can go out and work yourself to the bone, but you're still in charge of everything when you come home, because that's your divine mission. And that's really apparent if any of you want to log on to James Dobson's Focus on Family, or to listen to Sarah Palin, who has this idea that she represents in herself that you can run a state, run a family, look like a pinup, shoot them up in your spare time, and you can do it all, because that's what a woman does. You know, no matter that the kids are in terrible trouble and getting pregnant, and one of them had to go to Iraq because of an arrest record, you know, details, you know, that is an image promulgated by the religious right, and she's an example of it. So, in spite of that, the higher divorce rate in the red states shows us that, and the higher divorce rate among fundamentalists than anyone else, shows us that women don't necessarily buy that, since these divorces are mainly precipitated by